Hey, what's up? So you guys definitely don't need me to show you how to heat up a hot dog. Instead, this video is going to be a hot dog bun recipe with a liberal amount of hot dog theory thrown in. We're going to look at the whole package. I'm going to show you how to make the perfect hot dog bun for what, in my opinion, is the perfect hot dog, the Chicago dog. So if that sounds like fun, stick around. Let's get started. Okay, so step one on the journey to make a perfect Chicago dog definitely starts with the bun. And today we're gonna be making something called a Japanese style milk bun. These are really hot on the internet right now. You've probably seen a few recipes floating around, and for good reason. They're really tender, they're sweet, and super squishy. They utilize something called a TANGZHONG, which is basically just a paste of water, milk, and flour cooked together. That helps things stay tender, but we're gonna get to that. So to get started on this TANGZHONG, over medium heat in a small saucepan, we're gonna combine 45 grams of milk, 45 grams of room temperature water, and 15 grams of flour. We're gonna add that flour in by whisking it vigorously. We're gonna bring that to a simmer and stir it constantly. After about 60 seconds or a minute and a half, this thing's gonna start to thicken up and look almost like a bechamel or a roux. This is all the starch in the flour becoming fully gelatinized. So when we cook flour, we're gelatinizing the starch. And when you add gelatinized starch to a bread dough, it makes it more tender and more fully hydrated. It's very similar to a potato bun, actually. All we're doing there is cooking a potato and using that gelatinized starch to do the exact same thing. Once the flour and milk is thickened, we're gonna set that aside to cool off for a minute, and we're gonna grab our stand mixer. Into the bowl of that, we're gonna measure 110 grams of milk, 1 egg, 6 grams of yeast, all of the starter that we've let cool off for about 10 minutes, or what I'm calling here the milk paste, 50 grams of sugar, 5 grams of salt, 60 grams of room temperature butter, and then 300 grams of all-purpose flour. We're gonna mix this on medium-low speed for about 4 to 6 minutes. It's gonna take a second for all that butter to get incorporated. It's almost like a brioche dough at this point. There's really no reason you couldn't make this dough by hand, but it is gonna take a little bit of work. When I was developing this recipe, I didn't knead it enough early on, and that made it really hard to shape. This dough can be extra sticky because of the TANGZHONG starter we're using, so after 4 to 6 minutes of mixing, the butter should be fully incorporated, and the dough should have some well-developed strength. I'm gonna wrap this up with plastic wrap and let it rise in the mixing bowl on the counter for 90 minutes. After that 90 minutes, the dough should be just about doubled in size. It should look gassy and light, and it should hold an indent when you poke it with your fingy. I'm gonna dust everything up with flour here. We're gonna flip the dough onto the cutting board, and I'm gonna grab my scale. At this point, we're gonna portion this dough into 10 60-gram pieces. You can eyeball these if you want. The size isn't super important. I personally just really have to scratch that itch of consistency. After we've got the dough portioned, we're gonna pre-shape them into rounds. This is gonna make them easier to shape into buns later on, but it's also gonna give them some last minute strength. Ooh, this first one's a little sticky boy. I'm just gonna grab a little flour and a dough scraper, and there we go. This dough can get pretty sticky, so use the amount of flour that you need. It's definitely not gonna hurt it. This is gonna be our classic hamburger bun rolling technique, where you use your palm, the tips of your fingers, and your thumb to roll and tuck this into a tight little ball. I'm gonna ball up the rest of these and set them on a lightly floured sheet tray to rest for about 15 minutes. I like to cover them with another sheet tray so that we can prevent a skin from forming on the dough. Okay, so it's been 15 minutes, and now it's time to shape our buns. To do that, we're gonna grab a half sheet tray with a piece of parchment. We're gonna lube that up a little bit with some olive oil and just spread it around like that. So to shape these buns, we're just gonna flip them over onto a lightly floured work surface and tap them to degas. Using the tips of your fingers, we're just gonna fold this back, pressing down and pushing forward 3 to 4 times to create a little baby hot dog shape. Next, we wanna roll it out into a 5-inch tube, either using the palm of your hand or the tips of your fingers and going with a two-handed method. To make sure our buns are spaced properly, I like to go back and forth end to end instead of laying them down in a straight line. Every time I lay these out in a straight line, I run out of room on the end, and then I have squished buns. I also wanna note that I made this a 10 bun recipe because I thought that would be the ideal number of buns to go from end to end on a sheet tray. Turns out, after a bunch of tries, 9 is the perfect number. So I like to set my 10th bun off to the side. It becomes a straggler bun, still totally good. In fact, it's actually a really good snack bun for when you're building your dogs. Once we've got our buns shaped and spaced about a 1/2 inch apart, we're gonna cover them with a sheet tray and proof them on the counter for about 45 to 60 minutes. Okay, so the milk buns are proofing on the counter. Now's the time to talk about what makes a great Chicago dog. So in no particular order, you gotta have relish, crispy dill pickle, sport pepper, tomatoes, yellow mustard, celery salt, white onion, and an all beef hot dog. And that is what is on a Chicago dog. There's no room for subs here. And I'm not the ultimate rule maker. I don't like to speak in absolutes, but this is kind of like a natural law. If you're missing any of these things, it's no longer a Chicago dog. It's a sum greater than its parts situation. So we're gonna assemble what we need here. We're gonna start with the relish. Chicago hot dogs are known for the nuclear green relish, and you can buy this in Chicago on the shelf, but everywhere else you gotta make it the hard way. So we're gonna make this from scratch. Are you ready? Grab 1 drop of blue food coloring and add it to about 1 cup of relish. Looks weird, tastes great, nuclear green, we're good. For the pickle spear on a Chicago dog, I personally always go with a Clausen. These are the ones that come out of the refrigerator case. They've never been cooked. They're really snappy, they're super salty, and to be extra thorough here, Lauren and I did a taste test against the Mount Olive pickles right off the shelf. Not bad, they're a little bit softer, but I really like having that cold, salty, crisp Clausen. I'm gonna be honest though, I'm not mad about having open jars of both pickles in the fridge. The next essential ingredient here is the Vienna sport pepper. Next to the relish, this is probably the most exotic ingredient on the dog. It's crunchy, spicy, briny. If you can't find these, you can slum it with pepperoncinis. Those are gonna work in a pinch. For the tomatoes, we want something that's gonna fit on the dog, so I like to grab a small tomato. We're gonna cut these tomatoes into 8 size wedges that are gonna fit between the dog and the bun. I go for this cocktail tomato called a Campari. They're an off-the-shelf tomato that's sweet and has pretty good flavor for a grocery store. Up next, mustard, yellow, French's. That's it. Oh, I see a question in the back. Ketchup? No. Our last couple garnishes are celery salt, which I love, one of my favorites. I always go big, and some white onion. The prep on the onion is simple. We're just gonna give it a really small dice and we're gonna rinse it under some cold water and set it aside. In terms of hot dog, that's dealer's choice as long as it's all beef. I'd say my top choice is gonna be Vienna beef. That's the classic Chicago staple, but those aren't available in my market. So I'm going with the Kobayashi favorite, Nathan's. And that's the setup of the Chicago dog. Every one of these is as important as the other one. Once we've got all of our hot dog toppings assembled, we're gonna preheat our oven to 350 degrees and check on our buns. It's been about 45 minutes and my buns have grown by about 40 to 50%. They should be proof to the point where they're just touching. The last detail here to turn these into Chicago style buns is to cover them in poppy seeds. To do that, we're gonna give them a liberal egg wash. For me, that's 1 egg and just a splash of tap water. We're gonna follow that with tons of poppy seeds and go heavy here because you can pretty much guarantee that half of these poppy seeds are gonna fall off by the time they hit your mouth. Once we're all seated up, we're gonna pop these into the oven and bake them for about 25 minutes. After 25 minutes, they're nice and golden brown. They've got a really beautiful sheen on them, and they've got a great aroma from the toasted poppy seeds. They're super tender, they're steamy, and they tear apart perfectly. I'm gonna let these buns cool on the counter for a few minutes while I cook my hot dog. I say cook in quotes because it's actually probably the least important part of this recipe. Pick any way you want to heat these up. Today I'm just putting a little bit of oil in a cast iron skillet and sizzling them on the outside. And that's the last thing we do before we build our dogs. But pay attention to how I build this dog. Structural integrity is very important. If you can make it to that last bite and it's all stayed together, well, my friend, you've arrived. Welcome to Chicago. Let's eat this thing. You know, you get that little snap from the dog, some sweet, some heat, a little bit of crunchy onion in there. And one thing that I really like is the sort of like wetness that the tomato brings. Sounds weird, but it makes it much better. Any questions? And that's it. That's how you make a really nice squishy milk bun to go with your perfect Chicago dog. But this bun recipe can be used for burgers, bratwurst, kielbasa. I hope you guys liked this video, and if you did, give it a like, maybe hit subscribe. And if you do subscribe, turn on notifications. That lets you know when we post a new vid. As always, guys, thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you for sticking around to the end, and we'll see you next time. There's water in this package. Beware. Hot dog water. Hot dog water is dangerous.